So thank you all for being here today. This is Identity Matters, the LGBTQ job search. We have been looking forward to this for a while. Thank you to our panelists for being here. I'm just going to start. My name is Sarah Parker. I use she, her pronouns. I am the customer service and support specialist for the Career Development Center, which just means I connect a lot of people together and kind of keep our office moving, hopefully in a forward motion in a lot of ways. So I'm really excited to be here. As a queer woman, I am so excited to do something like this for our students so that students have resources that I only dreamed of in college. So I'm really excited to have this today. Thank you all for being here and being part of it. And I'm going to let my co-moderator, Jenny, introduce herself.
Hey everybody, I too am really excited to be here today and see this take shape. I have worked at Appalachian. This is my 22nd year. And right now, my current role straddles both career development and student engagement and leadership. So I work specifically with Sarah and Clarinda and others on this phone call as well. But I'm very happy to be here. I have worked with students the entirety of my career. I'm a career student affairs professional and have really loved every step of the way. I'll hand it off to our panelists now. Clarinda, would you like to start, please?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Clarinda Choice, and I am the Assistant Director for Campus Activities for Clubs and Organizations.
Hey y'all, my name is Rebby Kern. I go by the pronouns they, them, theirs, and I'm the Director of Education Policy at Equality North Carolina. Really glad to be here on the panel with y'all.
And I'm Mike Schaefer. I manage college recruiting for E&J Gallo Winery, and I am president of our LGBTQ+ employee resource group.
Thank you all. And I want to say too, before Jenny's going to start with our questions, but if you have a question during the panel, feel free to put that in the chat and we will check those as often as possible. We have a little bit of structure here, but we really want to go off of how the movement goes and the questions that we have that come up.
Okay, well, we have three panelists who have had successful job searches. You all have jobs, so we are eager to hear what you have to share, but I want to peel it back to when you were job searching. And if you could share some of the emotions or feelings that you had during that process. You know, part of our write-up for this workshop is that there may be special considerations for members of the LGBTQ+ community. And I'm wondering if you experienced any of those along your journey as it relates to your job search. Bearing in mind, we're going to ask kind of some follow-ups about when you began to reveal certain parts of your identity. Some of that how to navigate will come later. So right now, if you could just share some of the feelings that you felt during your job search. Also, if there's a distinction between a younger version of you and now, if you want to share that journey as well about maybe how you've evolved. Anybody can start.
Okay, I'll start. So I did just have a recent job search. I just got to App in March. And so one of the things that came to me when I reviewed this question when you sent it was just the feelings of inadequacy. I had a real bout with imposter syndrome. And I think that really stems from the fact that I've only attended predominantly white institutions or worked at predominantly white institutions. So that makes me think about not only my queer identity, but also being a Black woman. And so I think just being able to navigate those thoughts of I'm not good enough at this, I'm not smart enough and things of that nature, even though I've had, you know, success in the past, that was kind of my hardest thing to navigate. And I don't know, just as far as like kind of addressing those issues for me always takes like being really intentional about how I talk to myself and kind of sticky notes are key. I like to put sticky notes around to kind of remind myself that I am capable. You know, I've done this before. I have like a beautiful rap sheet that shows all the things I've done. So kind of keeping those things in mind.
Clarinda, I'm so glad that you brought up imposter syndrome because that's something that is pervasive for me as I've navigated through working for nonprofits along the way. My experience is unique in this space that I knew while I was leaving college that I wanted to be in a service-based organization. I wanted to serve young LGBTQ people. And so nonprofit sector was a really great place for me to apply the activism that I had been in development throughout my college years. And so my biggest question was, will I make enough money? Because knowing that the nonprofit sector, I couldn't make a goal of making six figures by 30. That was not going to be in my plan. And so because of that, I also had to ask myself, will I be taken advantage of as a young queer professional? Because that's something that is not only because of race and because of identity, but navigating through the industrial nonprofit complex is like historically underpaid and underpaid on purpose. So it's like, we can just give you a stipend for $1,800 and think that you can actually live off of that in any city. And so I became very aware of that and had no negotiation skills whatsoever. I just was like, please hire me. I matter.
Thank you.
Good. So, I think I've been very lucky. I came out fairly early in life, somewhere around 1998, when I was a sophomore in college. And basically, all of my job searches, I've been pretty much open and honest and out about it. In fact, there's even a line on my resume several lines on my resume that would tell a prospective employer that I identify with the community. And I figure if they care about that or they're worried about that, that's kind of their issue. And I don't want to work there anyway. So I don't think I've ever felt super scared about it. Certainly you have to be choiceful about what kinds of jobs you apply for and what kinds of companies in particular you're looking for. There was a part of me that worried when I moved from Chicago to rural California 6 years ago. The first question I got was not, do you have a significant other or anything like that? It was, what is your faith community? One of my neighbors asked me that as a starting question. I started to wonder, did I make a choice that isn't great? But I live my true self every day, and that now has worked out for me. So I'm lucky. I'm very lucky in that regard, I think.
Thank you to all of you. Sarah?
Yeah, so I appreciate, Mike, that you brought up like little times that you've mentioned in your resume and things like that about your identity. So my next question is just, was there a particular moment in a job search, in previous job searches, in kind of one that you've done most recently, where you chose either to reveal your identity, parts of your identity, or chose to hold that back? And kind of what was the feelings, the process of doing that for you?
I don't mind taking this one on first. Because of my identities and the work that I've done, taking in that role of gay for pay, as they say, it was, can I handle having my identities on the front line? And so I often am in a space of education within universities, K-12 schools, educating educators. And so oftentimes what happens is that if I come forward with all of my identities in that moment, sometimes they won't hear me. They won't hear what I have to say, and it'll become about some agenda. And so navigating, like, that is the same feeling sometimes sitting at an interview table with an employer of like, are people still going to hear me, or will they be distracted by who I am, and how can I lead with that? I feel really lucky to be able to have participated in roles and grown my work from the seat of who I am, and even having more access as a trans queer person of color, like living with a disability, to navigate and manage resources and access and self-care and wellness, because my teams have an underlying connection. Like the majority of the teams I've been on are also queer. My race, though, right, being a Black person, often goes unseen and the last to be invited to the table. And so we're seeing a lot of shifting in that as more organizations are holding accountable, or are being held accountable to some of that work. and just that feeling of like not having all of me seen all the time and the long-term impacts of that. Yeah, those are some thoughts for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike, did you want to go? Anyone?
So I guess what I'll say is I feel like in my professional life, at least, there's probably a small moment every single day where I come out in some way, shape, or form. Whether that's a new person I'm meeting, or it comes up in conversation, or I join a conference call with a whole bunch of strangers. Whatever the opportunity is, it does happen a lot, and I think you just get better at it with time, to the point where maybe you don't lead with it, but when the opportunity does present itself, you recognize it and you make sure they understand what your identity is, so they don't make any mistakes. And if people do make mistakes, I'm very comfortable saying, hey, no big deal. I don't have a girlfriend, but my boyfriend would be happy to meet you, right? Something like that.
Thank you for highlighting that. Yeah, constant process sometimes.
Yeah, it's ever evolving, ever present, really.
Yeah.
So when thinking about that question, I go back to when I was like first stepping into the professional field, and I think I was lucky in the sense when it comes to the queer part of my identity, that my first supervisor was queer and out, and so I worked in a very LGBTQ affirming workspace. So I never really had to think about that part of my identity because that was a part of the conversation during staff meetings or anything like that. But to piggyback off of what Rebby mentioned is that your race goes unseen. It's typically the last part of your identity that's brought to the table. That's a whole different ballgame though. So I've always been pretty out and open, very queer and happy to be queer in the workspaces I choose. But also I think the difference for me to be able to do that is working in higher education. I feel like in higher ed, we were pretty much the pioneers of using your pronouns and embracing those pronouns. So I think I'm pretty lucky in that aspect. And it is also just an example of how representation matters. If I didn't have that representation early on, I wouldn't go into these different workspaces so confident and comfortable being who I am.
Thank you all. That was wonderful. Thanks.
Yeah. And this next question has to do, I guess, with a few more brass tacks, kind of like as part of the job search process. When did you all, do you remember making choices, and also what were those choices that you made along the way? Was it in your cover letter? Was it on a resume? Or like, how was it revealed? Was it on a resume? Was it maybe during an in-person interview where you chose or didn't choose to reveal parts of your identity? Can you speak to that, please?
I'll take it first. So for me, it was all of the above, like from the cover letter to the resume to the in-person Zoom interview to the on-campus interview. Again, if I talk about how I'm applying for a higher ed job, so putting my pronouns by my signature in the cover letter, she, they, was one of the ways I did it, right? And then when it came to my resume, if you saw all the things I was interested in, the committees I served on, all those things were like a clear message to anyone reading it. Okay, this is what's important to this person, whether it be serving on as the liaison between the community and my institution for the Pride Parade, or being the staff advisor for the Black Student Union, things like that. Kind of just highlighted the things I was proud of and I was connected to. But then when it came to the Zoom interview, there were certain questions that were asked, and I used experiences that would highlight my identity and how those played a role in those experiences. And then in person, I was given the opportunity to present to a group of students on whatever subject I chose. So I chose intersectionality, but then gave me another, opportunity to talk about how the layers of my identity play a role in everything I do, my existence.
Thank you. So Clarinda's was really like every step of the way. Others?
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier that it's on my resume. I think I do. I think it's easier if it's on paper and people can see it, so they're prepared for it, and maybe you're not even talking to them if it's something that matters to them. But just, I mean, you could use whatever little example you can come up with to get it through on your resume or in a cover letter. Just as an example, when I lived in Chicago, I was in the Chicago Gay Men's Chorus. And so there was just a bullet point at the bottom and under other data that just said I was in that chorus. And, I was just sort of letting that speak for itself. Just sort of not super in your face, but it was there and I was proud about it. So you can see that that's me.
I want to be really clear with folks in the room too, that it's okay to not come out on these documents and upfront, because it's a safety measure, right? So I come from a space of growing up on the West Coast, and even though I went to a faith-based institution, I let them know who I was. And the side jobs that I had, I didn't lead with my queer identity because I couldn't understand whether I would be held for that, if I would be protected because of that. Policies aside, culturally, I mean, the hospitality industry is tough to be an out queer person in some spaces. And so I honor that. I honor that if you are not in a space to come out and lead with your identities, don't, especially when it comes to gender identity. I just want you all to know that, like, I withhold my pronouns a lot of the times if I'm and not only in the job sphere, but also in leading trainings. Like I said earlier, if I lead with my gender identity, people are not always going to invite me to the table to do work because they're not there yet. However, the flip side of that is that you get to determine the kind of workspace you want to be in. So if you're in an interview that you don't feel comfortable asserting your pronouns, is that really the place that you want to work? And to start to understand some of that. It's also a space of power. Like, all of the times that I've been interviewed throughout my career, I ask them and I say, this is who I am. What is your organization doing to protect me and create equity, and hold them accountable to that? Like, you get to ask, what has your organization done in the last year to include more of my identities in your leadership, in your board, in your staff, in your stakeholders? And this runs true with higher ed as well, which is predominantly white spaces. And so how are queer people of color navigating through the leadership ranks? And you can ask that on an interview and they're like, oh, and that's good information for you to be like, I don't know if I want to work here. Yeah, so really taking some power back in that, so that you can be in a space that's already ready for you.
Great, thank you all so much. And yeah, I'm glad, Rebby, that you brought up the complexities of this, because there's 100 choices along the way, and not the point of this conversation today is not to just point out how you should be making all these choices to reveal your identities. It's how do you make those choices, and what parts of yourself do you reveal along the way? So thank you for bringing the counterpoint to that too. Sarah?
Yeah, and as a person who has multiple jobs in our community too, I just got my job at App in February, and I feel what Clarinda does about, like, higher ed feels more comfortable. Like, it's easier to talk about things and to hold people accountable, ask those questions like Rebby asked. And I worked at a small linen store that catered to the vacationers of Boone before I came to App, and that was not somewhere I could ever be out or would list my pronouns on my email or any of those things. Like, that was not a safe space, kind of like you said, Rebby, with the hospitality industry. There were, my boss had like a rainbow flag on one thing, or like supported Bernie, which, like, he thought was like kind of enough to be, I think, on this side of folks in the community, but that wasn't enough a lot of the time. So what does that kind of look like to when you all have been navigating those job searches? Like, we see a lot of rainbow washing, a lot of Target can have a pride section 1 month out of the year, and corporations are really buying into just slapping a rainbow flag on something because it makes them money too. So like, how do you discern whether it's like a small nonprofit, a smaller, maybe just a company that's a local company, or whether it's someone like E&J Gallo, Mike, who has ERGs and things like that? How do you determine whether that space, when you're doing an interview and going through that job search process, is truly welcoming and affirming of your identity, or if they're just kind of putting on a show and they may not totally get it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, so I mean, one place to look, especially for the larger companies, is the Human Rights Campaign scorecard, right? So Gallo has 100% on that. And that comes along, to get 100%, you have to do a lot of things that aren't always necessarily easy. And you also have to sort of stay ahead of trends. A few years ago, we had to put in a whole bunch of stuff into our health plan that didn't come automatically, and we had never thought about it before. But definitely there's a different sort of healthcare that trans people need if they're going through a gender transition, right? And so we have to include all of those things. And so it was really just a matter of us saying, hey, we need to include these things. And the company was like, sure, yeah, that makes sense. But then, big and small things. So you mentioned the merchandise. By the way, the Target in my neighborhood in Chicago actually has Pride stuff year round. But it was also a very gay neighborhood. I don't think the one here in Modesto, California does. But Barefoot, for example, is one of our products. They go to 80 Pride marches a year, which sounds like the very definition of rainbow washing, right? But they don't just go and show up and be there to sell things. They go and they care and they invest in the community. But also, they come to us, they come to the ERG and they say, hey, let's have a focus group. We're going to do XYZ for the community. We'd love to get your take on it. And even just last year, they had a campaign they were going to run that I thought was extremely terrible. There was a lot not quite right with it. They just sort of missed the mark. But one thing they had right was they wanted to donate the proceeds to Free Mom Hugs, which, if you haven't heard of it, is a delightful organization. So I was really excited about that. I was like, let's make this work. We need to change this in some way. Let's have a focus group with the rest of the ERG. So we did that, and we came up with a great campaign for this year's Pride, which was of course canceled. But the good thing that came out of that was, instead of doing the Pride thing, what we came up with to replace it was to dress a bottle of Barefoot Brut Rosé in the Pride flag year round. So now, anytime you go to a liquor store and you're seeing a Pride flag, it's probably a Barefoot bottle, and it's there year round now. So asking the questions, do you have an ERG? Like, do you have support? But what do they do and how involved are they? I think all those can be really enlightening. I have a lot of stories because I teach a 4-hour class called Ally 101 once a quarter. So anyone in the company can come and listen, and we do a lot of interactive discussion and some vocabulary words, and really trying to get them to understand how they can be better allies at work and even outside of work. And so asking companies what kinds of programs they're running can be pretty enlightening about if they actually care.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that too. Does the ERG have power? What are they doing? Can they say, Barefoot, you got it wrong, we're going to fix it? I think that's really important part of that conversation. Thanks.
Yeah.
This conversation around Target is something that I engage with as well, because it's a very clear face-fronting picture of what capitalism is doing to make money off of the queer community. One thing that I do want to make sure is said is that the chief marketing officer for Target serves on the board of GLSEN. And so Target put forward like $100,000 towards GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, doing incredible work with K-12 schools across the country. However, that information is not externally communicated in clear ways. So I use that as an example because when you are researching a company or an organization, what research can you do before you get to the interview to inform some of those deeper questions? I think that it is important that you don't know until you ask or until you do that research. It's a really key indicator. When I was coming of age, it was all, take questions with you to the interview. And I was like, no, I have no power. I can't ask questions in an interview. And to find that space of power to do that research and say, okay, so is this relationship because of this person, or have you institutionalized your commitment to queer organizing when you make money off of queer merchandise, right? Whatever that means, the prides and everything. So I do just want to share that and to do that research. Something that came up for me today was I got asked to do a training for a healthcare group. And so I went on the homepage and searched LGBT, and there's only one hit that came back. And so in talking with the organizers, it's like, I don't know if I'm ready to start this work with you. You might need a different team to come in. And so doing a search on an employer's page, just whether you go to Barefoot and just search the page or Apple F and search LGBT or gay and see what pops up, that's a really great place to start. Or, Google's your friend. And one thing I do want to say, this is a particular issue when it comes to hiring trans women of color. We know it to be true that trans women of color, particularly Black trans women, are the highest marginalized and victimized within the queer community. If these organizations don't have any Black trans women working for them, that's a key indicator. And the HRC Equality Index isn't going to measure that. And so I think that asking that specific question and not being bypassed with those people don't apply, or, we don't have qualified candidates, what job employment training are they offering to folks, right? And in spaces like Chicago, I'm sure the Center on Halstead has an incredible job training program to get folks ready for the job sector. That's not available everywhere. And organizations that are willing to train up, those are going to be the ones that that you really want to look for. So I definitely want to make sure that I share that.
And just to kind of piggyback off of Mike and Rebby, research is key. Check out their social media, dig deep. For me, I want to see that the advocacy, the support, and the representation has been there consistently, not just now when the topics are hot. I just want to make sure that they align themselves with the LGBT community, and it's kind of woven into the fabric of the institution. You see it in their diversity statements, you see it in their mission statements, you see it in the benefits that they provide for same-sex couples or so on. They have gender-neutral bathrooms. I look at every little thing I can. I read articles. I kind of just go to work and do my homework, and that's what I did for App State for the most part. I feel like I could have dug some more, but I definitely did research as much as I could.
Yeah, and I think there's times, Rebby, I think you mentioned this earlier, sitting in an interview and being like, ooh, my pronouns are not welcome here, or my identity is not really something that I'm going to talk about out loud. And there, I think, are cues, or as you start bringing up some of those experiences, maybe that, like Mike said, are on your resume, you're going to feel the room of going, ooh, I'm going to hold that back for right now. And that's totally okay to be able to figure that out later. I think there are longer conversations too. The job search is a long thing. It's not just one moment. So thank you all. I'm gonna move to Emmy's question. So what kind of advice do you have for people applying to small companies? So we've talked a lot about big, and they've got a good website, they've got a lot of resources and things like that. Emmy's field has lots of small private practices or schools that don't have big social media or online presence. So yeah, what is a small company? How do we feel those things out?
I'll take it, Rebby. So one thing I was going to say is, if you know someone who knows someone that actually worked there, you can get that direct, experience from them. Kind of ask questions. I know even if it's a small company, typically they do have social media or something like that. Again, kind of do the same things, but also kind of see if you know any connections so you can get some real answers and some real feedback.
And working with smaller companies, you might be able to ask them for a shadow so that you can get a taste of the climate, and sort of be there, and maybe they would set you up with another employee to have that sort of employee interview. I'll say this too, there might be space to support growth in a small company that you maybe wouldn't be able to do with a large organization that has like a board and executive staff. That navigating smaller companies might benefit you if you are in a space of activism in that way. And sometimes they're willing to shift, like you can see a culture shift by you being in that space, in that presence. That comes with a lot of emotional labor that you might not always get paid for. And so the amount of emotional labor I put forward in some of these spaces, I have to have a really, really strong self-care regimen to be able to do that work. And so that would be my advice if you're willing to sort of hide out and be in a small company and be okay with that. But I also know that some small companies in rural areas equate to anti-trans and anti-queer. And so you have to be able to make that designation. Who owns the company? What's that person's particular views? Because likely they're carrying their personal views into how they run their small business as well. And we see that even in Charlotte too. And so you have to be in choice about that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think I've Facebook stalked some people before I applied for jobs before. That's real. I think you get, if you can find people like Clarinda said, who have worked for a company before, and you can see their personal views, often those personal views, like Rebby said, come into play in the office environment. Especially if you're at a small company, I'm sure you all have had those experiences where it's harder to say what you actually think with just 5 people on a team together and you're working a small amount. You just can't be as open sometimes. So yeah. Thank you all for that. Do we have any other questions? I know Susan asked a question. Do we have any other student questions that you all would like to ask before we move into that question? All right, then I'll move on to what Susan asked. Susan is the director of the Career Development Center, and she's done a lot of this work. She actually started, her meetup that she did was Inclusivity Matters, and so this Identity Matters is kind of a branch off of that. We're trying to do a lot of digging into different identities and backgrounds in our office and doing a little bit more of this work intentionally. So I'm thankful for her to kind of push us forward to do this too. So she asks, what suggestions do you all have for career services professionals for us of how we can improve those resources, support, and career planning for members of our LGBTQ community? Suggestions for websites or online resources would be welcome. I know we mentioned the Human Rights Campaign Index. That's something we have on our website right now. So what else do you all think?
Some and not to say that you don't already do this, but making sure that those professionals are trained up in identity topics and themes and sort of how to manage and navigate. Somebody had mentioned gender journey. Are you providing any kind of document support as people navigate the hiring process, and mock interviews for trans folks who need to be able to say, this is why my name is different than on my ID, or this is why my appearance is different from my ID, and like navigating some of those spaces and point folks towards having maybe some of those documents updated and finding funds for that. And to continue to understand that that folks that are living with trans and gender nonconforming identities are going to have a very different experience than LGB. And I think that oftentimes that goes unseen. We just are pushing lesbian and gay folks to the forefront of these conversations. And what are we really doing to train up and prepare young Black and Latinx trans folks through this navigation as well?
Thank you. Yeah.
So I can just tag onto that. I think the first thing that occurs to me, by the way, I didn't mention it, but I spent many years as a career counselor at Northwestern University,
Oh, cool.
which is why I lived in Chicago. So like my brain is like trying to combine career services with what I do now. I think, you know, finding either alumni or people in the community that are willing to be one-on-one mentors might be a really good step, because a lot of this is very individual, and it's hard to lump all the letters together. It's hard to even within the letters to say everyone has the same experience and the same concerns would be a mistake. And so I think, you know, the more individual you can get, the better. And it's probably not like a resource that you can point people to, but it could be varied depending on who you're talking to and what their particular concerns or needs are.
Just piggybacking off of what Rebby and Mike said, this opportunity right here is a great starting point. Also, representation. Even if you don't have that in your direct office, you have colleagues like myself that you can tap into to have these conversations. So I think that's important. I think you all are doing a great job. This is something I didn't have when I was an undergrad, so this is great.
Totally agree with that. I wish I had forums like this. And again, I was coming from a faith-based institution, so I was already fighting with the school in a lot of ways. So really, really, really great work. I'll also drop my email in the chat bar if anybody has questions about navigating sort of the queer nonprofit experience. Happy to follow up there and be a resource.
Thank you so much. We have just a couple minutes left, and seeing no additional questions in the chat box, I have just sort of a quick finish question, and that would be, you've given lots of great advice about things to do, and I'm wondering, sometimes it helps to reframe some advice. What would you encourage students not to do in their job search? Wow.
That's a good one.
Well, it's a hard question to answer because every job search is a little different.
Sure.
I would say I will encourage them, and this is not what to do, but like encourage them to just believe in themselves. Again, like I said, that imposter syndrome gets me every time. Stay true to yourself, because ultimately, I know not everyone can be out and open, but what I found that when I was, like, I knew that I was applying to LGBTQ affirming companies when they gave me that callback, you know? So, I mean, maybe dropping those if you feel comfortable, that would be a way. I don't know. It's just like, my thing is just be yourself, and you want to find something that aligns with you, because then you're going to think about all the mental health things that come up for you not being able to be comfortable in the space that you go to 40 hours a week. So just maybe be as you can be.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
There's something to be said about prioritizing your paycheck over your well-being. If you ever find yourself, whether it's wondering if a particular role or job is going to serve you well, don't do it for the bottom line. Your well-being and your mental health in the long run deserves to flourish. And so I come from a space of knowing that I would rather be broke and happy than rich and miserable. That also means that if you find yourself feeling like you're staying at a job, and now, please hear me say that your survival is crucial, and make those decisions for what you need. And if it's time to leave a job, then do that, and be in that search for something else, and don't leave a job until you have another job, if possible.
Yeah, I'll just tack one on. It's really interesting. So all companies right now are teaching employees about unconscious bias. We've been doing it for 4 years now. And it's this concept where everyone has unconscious biases that come out. Your brain basically fires them off automatically, and you don't really know. And every little thing could be an unconscious bias you have. And so I would encourage students not to apply, or to at least recognize when they have an unconscious bias about someone. So just as a little example, when I first started at Gallo, I met our vice president of benefits, and we had a great conversation. We became friends on Facebook, and I noticed some things that I found very troubling on there, and I made certain assumptions about this person based on what I had seen there, which turned out to be completely incorrect. Right, so he turns out to be an ally of the community, but I made assumptions based on things I was seeing, and so I would just be careful before you explore too far with people, to not prejudge what they're thinking about you. And that way you're not reading into some things they say that maybe is just a story you're telling yourself and not actually what their intent was.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, so thank you all. As Rebby said, don't stay in a place that that your mental health is going to be compromised forever. And the Career Development Center has resources for you to help you find a job. We are always here for you. So whether you're an alumni, whether you're a current student, that is going to keep going. We're going to keep supporting you. So if you need to make a shift in a few years after you graduate because you had to choose, I know I got caught in it at one point. You just have to have a job, have to have a paycheck, but making those shifts is hard. So lean on us. We're here for you. Absolutely. I want to say thank you again. This has been amazingly rich discussion. Thank you all for your vulnerability, for your honesty, for everything that you brought to the table. Far beyond, I think I'll speak for both Jenny and I, far beyond what we thought we were going to get from this. Honestly, it got really big, and I'm so thankful for that. So thank you all for giving your time and your energy today, and we will keep having these conversations. So Rebby and Clarinda have put their email in the chat, and they're open to connection. So that's awesome. And I'm sure Mike is open to connection too, if any of you all would like to follow up with any of those folks or us. So thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.